Gran Turismo is a 1997 racing game released for the PlayStation, with a focus on the physics of driving to the point that it bordered on simulation, realistic car customization, and high-fidelity representation of licensed vehicles. It was obviously developed by car aficionados for car aficionados. Now, despite having a niche audience, Gran Turismo is the PlayStation's most successful franchise. It boasts millions of units sold and claims solid review scores from critics. Even after 20 years, the Gran Turismo series is standing strong. But how did a niche racing game for gearheads become a PlayStation flagship title? The story of Gran Turismo is the story of Kazunori Yamauchi. Yamauchi has been fascinated by cars since he was 3. When he was 24, he bought a Nissan GT-R. 6 months later, he crashed it while driving over 120 miles per hour. Yamauchi knew and understood the principles underlying car racing. So he pitched a project to Sony, a racing game that used the real physics to let players experience racing the way professional racers around the world did. Most games up to that point used polygonal boxes with set speeds and performance. Yamauchi wanted to calculate the physics from the torque of the engine to the friction of each wheel's contact patch. Sony declined. Instead, Yamauchi paid his dues, making Motor Tune Grand Prix 1 and 2. Both games were solid racing games that, despite their colorful animated aesthetic, laid the groundwork for his vision. More importantly, the Motor Tune series was successful enough that when Yamauchi again pitched his dream game, he was approved. GT1, 1997-1998. Yamauchi's team of about 12 people spent the next 5 years creating Gran Turismo. They licensed over 100 vehicles from car makers like Nissan, Dodge, and Aston Martin. Each car was created in the game based on data from extensive photography, realistic sound recording from the actual cars, and physical model kits. Not content to reproduce cars as they were made from the factory line, the Gran Turismo team added customization that went beyond a generic upgrade system. Suspension, air system, and brake upgrades, just to name a few, allowed players to change out parts on their virtual cars the same way that you could in a garage. That care and dedication showed. Gran Turismo easily caught up with competitors of the time, many of which only had a few dozen generic vehicles on offer. The craftsmanship and attention to detail exposed millions to the breadth and depth of car racing for the first time and made Gran Turismo the most successful game for the original PlayStation. GT2, 1999. After the release of Gran Turismo, the development team was spun out from Sony Digital Entertainment and became Polyphony Digital. While they were more independent, they were still under pressure to create a sequel in time for Christmas 1999. Gran Turismo 2 made that deadline in Japan and North America, but the time pressure showed. Bugs corrupted save games, which meant that hard-earned cars could vanish from a player's garage. For completionists, only 98.2% of the game could be completed. While mechanical damage had been implemented, it lacked the ultra-realistic racer boast realistic collisions and physical damage players were clamoring for. The care and craft was still there, though. Given the choice to cut from the game of Gran Turismo or the experience, Polyphony had chosen to keep the experience. The number of cars on the roster was 4 times that of its predecessor, and each one received the individual attention to handling and modeling Polyphony used for their first installment. The physics were upgraded and integrated the mechanical damage with the customization options. Gran Turismo 3 A-Spec. Gran Turismo 2's graphics were another sticking point for some. They were comparable to the first, even though the number of vehicle models ballooned. For Gran Turismo 3 A-Spec, the PlayStation 2 provided additional power and allowed Polyphony to improve the look of the game and the fidelity of the car models. Between the move to a new system and the focus on graphical upgrades, though, elements of Gran Turismo 2, like the mechanical damage, the hundreds of additional cars, and some customization options, were removed. The number of vehicles crept back down to a number closer to that offered by the original Gran Turismo. Even though with those compromises, the game ran critically behind schedule as Yamauchi fought hard to avoid the bugs in Gran Turismo 2. These delays pushed it back to a 2001 release date, forcing Sony to rename what had been triumphantly announced as Gran Turismo 2000. What Gran Turismo 3 kept from the previous installment was the arcade mode. The vision of Gran Turismo was connecting players to the feel of professional driving, embodied in the tagline, "The Real Driving Simulator." That included developing the skills of a professional driver. The first Gran Turismo led players to develop those skills with licensed races and a limited stable of modestly performing cars. Licenses led to races, which in turn led to money and better cars. While the license system bordered on grinding, it was a hardcore video game that demanded much from its players. Arcade mode made more cars available from the start, allowed players to unlock additional cars through varied arcade play, and in some versions boasted its own ending. Arcade mode was an olive branch to more casual gamers and a marketing move that broadened the game's appeal. Despite all of these challenges, A-Spec was the most successful installment of the series. The series' constant sales and critical acclaim showed that the gamers appreciated the depth of knowledge usually reserved for car aficionados, and the sometimes unforgiving challenge of racing based on the real-world physics. GT4 2004. GT3 set a high bar, and Polifoni and Yamauchi strove to meet it in the next installment. In 2004, it had taken 3 of the franchise's 7 years of history to make Gran Turismo 4. It further immersed players by rendering the pitching, downforce, and weighing down of cars during races. That small graphical change helped players see the effects of physics on their cars where real racers could feel them. Instead of relying on a traditional tutorial, Gran Turismo 4 packed in a manual on the physics of real racing. It also featured the expected expansion of available cars and tracks and well-executed graphical upgrades, including the ability to render those upgrades in 1080i. Despite canceled plans to include online play, Gran Turismo is continuing to focus on the experience of driving. More than any of its competitors, it crafted a way for gamers who'd never expect to even touch these vehicles to feel what it was like to control them. Little did anyone suspect the plans for Polifoni had for this vision. The 3-year gap between GT4 and its predecessor was a sign of things to come. The Polifoni team and Yamauchi had accumulated enough clout to dictate terms on the next installment, including the timetable for its release. It would be another 6 years before gamers could buy the next Gran Turismo title. Interregnum. The franchise wouldn't rest on its laurels though. In 2006, a Nissan promotional event put Gran Turismo players behind the wheel of actual race cars. The Nissan personnel present were impressed with the gamer's potentials, and Sony, Nissan, and Polifoni began discussions. A few years later, they would announce something most gamers would have only dreamed of: Gran Turismo Academy. It was really a television show made to find exceptional Gran Turismo players from around the world and give them the opportunity to become actual race car drivers. Potential racers were put through 4 phases of screening: physical and psychological evaluations, along with real racing challenges. At the end, one of them would become part of Nissan's driver development program. Lucas Orodnez completed all of GT Academy's trials to become its first champion and would go on to earn a second at Le Mans a few years later, showing that the skills imparted by GT were applicable to the real world. Polyphony also announced Gran Turismo HD. Scheduled for a 2007 release date, it would have kept the series on a regular release schedule. Envisioned as a bare-bones promise of the next installment's abilities on the PlayStation 3, GT HD's content would be available at a below-retail price, with content being provided by online play and downloadable content. In 2006, after releasing a free teaser in the form of Gran Turismo HD concept, Kazunori Yamauchi would confirm the cancellation of the main title so that Polyphony could focus on Gran Turismo 5. Just as Gran Turismo kept working, so too did its competitors. Microsoft and Turn 10 Studios launched the Forza series in 2005, answering Gran Turismo's PlayStation-only success with an Xbox exclusive. Forza featured realistic graphics like Gran Turismo, but integrated car damage, online play, and more driver assists into its design. While Gran Turismo insisted on honing skills by having players work for progression, Forza pushed the video game side of the racing game genre. GT5 2010. Despite the growth of competitors and stopgap measures like GT HD concept, pressure grew to release Gran Turismo 5. The PlayStation 3 had been out for years, and it still lacked a proper installment for one of its most anticipated games. However, when Gran Turismo 5 was finally released in 2010, Polyphony delivered on its promises. Online play, external car damage, dashboard views, enhanced physics, and thousands of cars. Notable drivers like Jeremy Clarkson, Dennis Malavani, David Coulthard favorably compared Gran Turismo 5 to the experience of driving real cars on real tracks. Now, despite the previous outcry and persistent complaints about the AI and collision physics, all was forgiven. The attention to detail and knowledge of each car was still there, and those factors would make Gran Turismo 5 the highest-selling PlayStation exclusive for the console. Yamauchi still wasn't satisfied. While the thought of the PlayStation 3 as a larger vessel, he still wanted to polish Gran Turismo into an experience that was yet more clean and beautiful. GT6 2013. Part of that experience was providing something players had never seen before. For years, auto manufacturers had credited Gran Turismo with introducing gamers and car aficionados from around the world to vehicles that they would never have seen otherwise. The Vision Gran Turismo program recognized that and sought to help car makers and Polyphony work closer together. While that of a cooperation would seem like advertising in another series, Gran Turismo has always been about the cars. The series had been designed to showcase good cars honestly, and most automakers were eager to have their best included in a game played by millions of gamers. What Vision Gran Turismo did was allow over a dozen car companies to submit concept cars for Gran Turismo 6. Gamers were allowed to play cars that, with a few exceptions, were designed with cutting-edge, modern-day technology, but were too prohibitively cost-expensive to actually produce. They featured a novel approach to aesthetics and the science of driving, which could only be executed and experienced in a simulation like Gran Turismo. 2013's Gran Turismo 6 wasn't solely based around the Vision program. It kept at its edge by offering over 1,000 cars and 37 locations with dozens of layouts. The introduction of variable weather and environmental changes gave it endurance, while players worked their way up the ranks of licensed games. Downloadable content helped out more casual players who didn't have the time or skills to master its nuances. While controversial, it opened up a usually closed and demanding experience. This versatility and imagination, backed up by the Polyphony's team's solid backbone of immersive game design, photorealistic courses, sounds pulled directly from real cars they represent, and performance and customization familiar to players who know cars, were the bedrock on which these innovations were based. GT Sport 2017. The Vision program was continued for Gran Turismo Sport when it was released back in October, and it has continued to be a success. This time, the Polyphony team decided early that instead of diverting resources to the always problematic AI, Gran Turismo Sport would focus on the best opponents in racing: other people. Online racing is pushed further forward than the traditional single-player campaign, but that seems to be in keeping with Polyphony's philosophy on the series, the human experience, and few things are more human than competing with your fellow man. It's still too early to know if Gran Turismo Sport's new features like its VR mode or the FIA Managed Championship will become genre standards for forgotten experiments. But the first GT game for the PlayStation 4 has continued the franchise's tradition of handcrafted excellence and the experience of driving. Gran Turismo Sport is the next step in Yamauchi's deliberate, never-ending question to create a real, handcrafted driving experience for gamers. That's what has made it indispensable to Sony and to gaming. Now, we hope you enjoyed this short history of one of our favorite franchises. If there's anything we forgot, please let us know. This history was an experiment, and if you'd like to see more of these in the future, reach out to us in the comments or on our other social media platforms. I'm Matt for Game Domain, and thank you for watching.